Thanks for tuning in to a special episode of the Druber Health Podcast. Today we're going to cover a listener question because I thought it was important, and just in case others were feeling that way, I wanted to touch base and try to just kind of smooth things over and make sure that you guys aren't feeling too overwhelmed here. So this first question, basically it was a listener who felt like their list of foods that they can eat is decreasing to nothing, especially finding out that deuterium is in water. Like, how do you avoid that? And the answer is you don't. Like, toxins are everywhere, but it's our job to limit them in a sense, right? So we want to make sure that we are not being bombarded and overloaded in all areas and aspects of our life, right? Now, we mostly just talked about food, but, there's toxins in our environment and whatnot. So if we can be focusing on doing more with our food, that's great. Now, thing is that there is a lot to go over. And I know that we covered a lot in the 6 episodes. It really, affected a lot of different foods that we're eating. Big thing that I want to drive home with you guys is that if you can remove a lot of processed food from your diet, you're going to be doing yourself huge favors, and it's going to be taking care of about 90% of whatever you guys are dealing with. If you are dealing with any health problems, it's going to improve your overall health. And the reason is that a lot of the anti-nutrients and toxins are going to be in these processed foods. If we can swap those out for fresh, organic, and actual food, it's going to be way better for our health. So really, that's the best place to start, is start improving the quality of your food, and then you can really start looking out for these other things like these anti-nutrients and these toxins. But just by eating more actual whole foods, you're going to be already doing huge favors for your body. And we're going to be going over the great stuff about foods in these next coming episodes. So I'm excited to do that. I wanted to give you guys the information on the stuff to look out for right away so that it can be easily referenced as we're talking about foods in the future. And then you guys can always go back and reference them. Like, you don't have to make these changes right away. And that's something that I want to also drive home here for you, is that I started this journey about 4 years ago, and I implemented things along the way. It wasn't all at one time. Now, I know I dumped a lot of information on you guys all at once, but I need you to understand that you don't have to make all of these changes right away. So pick and choose what's going to be easiest for you, and once it gets to a point where you don't even have to think about it anymore, then you can add something else in, but don't be in a rush. Any of the changes that you're going to make are already going to go a long way. So try not to get discouraged. Don't worry about drinking water, all right? I know that was a concern of the person that was asking questions, but we have to drink water. That's going to happen. We can cut down, if we're specifically looking at deuterium, we can cut that down by eating less sugars, right? Less processed sugars, that's going to be super helpful. If you're concerned about anti-nutrients, then you can eat less plant-based foods, but there's also plant-based foods that have lower amounts of these anti-nutrients. So you can do your research on those. I know with the oxalate list I included, there's foods that have oxalates in them, but there's foods that have much lower levels compared to others. So those lower level ones are going to be okay for you guys to eat. And that goes with a lot of these other things. So don't feel like you just have to completely throw out everything. My diet consists of fruit, dairy, a lot of meats. I will eat some chips from time to time. I try to stay away from vegetable oils, but I will go out to restaurants and eat what they have. You guys don't have to be either. Like I mentioned in the early episodes here, just being consistent is super helpful, and that will allow you to, have foods that you maybe wouldn't normally eat and not have to feel bad about it, okay? So please, I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed. Take baby steps. You don't have to make all these changes right away. And I have zero expectations at the rate or how fast you're making these changes. I just want to make sure I'm supplying the information for you. I had a question about my research and where I'm getting a lot of my information from. I do a lot of my research analysis on PubMed and referencing experiments and abstracts on there. I also have different experts and doctors that I reference as well. So if you're interested in seeing specific information on that, you guys can reach out to me and I can supply you links and whatnot and reference some people and doctors and experts. So the next thing I wanted to go over was actually that I had a blood panel done recently. So I ordered a blood panel through Inside Tracker back in the spring and wanted to use it up before the end of the year. So I had one scheduled for last week, got my blood drawn, and I got my results back. And Inside Tracker does a pretty cool layout as far as the results go. So it's broken up into sections and specific categories. So like the first section is considered the cognition category, and that's going to cover vitamin B12 and folate, which I believe is a B9 vitamin. So for vitamin B12, I was at 934, and that's considered normal range. And then folate, I was at 10.1, which is considered optimal. The next category was listed as inflammation. That covered a lot of cells that are in our blood. So white blood cells, neutrophils, basophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, neutrophils, lymphocyte percentage, basophil percentage. So it was like percentages and counts. And all of mine were in the optimal range for that one. So that was pretty cool to see. The next section was called heart health. So I had to deal with cholesterol. So total cholesterol was 142. Which is considered optimal. HDL was 57, LDL cholesterol was 78, triglycerides were at 26, and ApoB was at 51, and those were all considered optimal. The next section was sleep, and that covered magnesium, vitamin D, and RBC magnesium, and all of my levels were in the optimal range. So magnesium was 2.3, vitamin D was 85, and RBC magnesium was at 5.6. Following section after that was called metabolism. It covered glucose, HbA1c, and ALT. So glucose was at 84, HbA1c percentage was at 5, and ALT was at 15. And those, like I mentioned, were all optimal. Next section was considered endurance. So that had to do with ferritin, hemoglobin, iron, TIBC, transferrin saturation percentage, RBC, hematocrit, MCV, MCH, MCHC, RDW percentage, and platelets, and MPV. Now, all of those were in the optimal range besides the range of the iron-related ones. So that's ferritin, iron, and transferrin saturation. Those were all considered normal rather than optimal, and it's because they were up a little bit higher, and the reason for that is because my diet is a lot of red meat. So I'm getting in more iron than if I were to be eating primarily like chicken or pork or even like fish or seafood as a primary meat source. So red meat typically means you'll have higher amounts of iron in your system. Next section was called recovery, and that had to deal with creatine kinase, potassium, sodium, albumin, AST, and GGT. So all of those were in the optimal range. Creatine kinase was considered normal, and that was at 197. Potassium was at 4.8. Sodium was at 139. Albumin was at 5. AST was at 19. And GGT was at 16. Lastly was a hormone-related one. So we have calcium, and that was at 9.6. And then cortisol was at 16.1. And those were all considered optimal. Now, my diet has done some more evolving over the past year. Specifically, I've been adding in more grass-fed options, so like grass-fed dairy, grass-fed meats. That's been good. I also have been cutting down on the grains and starches I've been eating. So I've been eating less typically, or less amounts in a day. Typically, I notice that my digestive system does better if I limit that to one meal per day as far as having like those grains and starches. I feel it in my digestive system and also how my body is feeling overall. So that was a big change I made as well. And it's cool to see that these changes are paying off and I'm getting some really healthy biomarkers back. So really happy to see that. I plan on doing another bigger, more in-depth lab panel in June, typically twice a year. And then the other two quarters, I do like a more basic lab panel just to make sure everything's okay. But definitely recommend if you have the ability to get some labs done semi-consistently. All right. So for a while there, I was seeing a direct primary care physician. So you really don't involve insurance with that. You're paying for a membership, but everything is typically quite a bit cheaper. A basic full blood panel was like $14. So it was pretty darn cheap. It was very accessible for me. Now I'm spending more on like a more in-depth blood panel. So like the one I did through Inside Tracker was quite a bit more expensive, but it covers a more extensive amount of biomarkers. If you're looking to get more extensive labs done, I recommend either going through Inside Tracker or Marek Health, and that's spelled M-A-R-E-K. Those are good options. They have a bunch of different packages with different biomarkers that you can get labs done on. Another thing I recommend would be genetic testing. I haven't done any genetic testing yet personally, but I'm very interested in that because I know you can get a lot of very useful information and it can really help you figure out how to design your diet better and what lifestyle choices you should be making to just improve your overall health. Biggest takeaway from today's Q&A is just try not to get overwhelmed. Make little changes. Baby steps are great. If you can get rid of processed food, you are already on the right track there. You don't have to get rid of it completely, but if you can really start limiting processed food, that's going to be a great start. So I gave you the tools. We're going to be able to move on to the fun stuff. Next episode will be released on December 18th. That's a Monday, and that's going to be going over dairy. So I'm really looking forward to going over the awesome aspects of food. I'll give you guys all of my top recommendations, and I am excited to get to a more positive note on this food stuff. Stick with it. Try not to get too overwhelmed. Ask me questions. If you need help developing a diet plan, let me know. I'd love to help out. And keep listening. I promise it's going to get more positive. It's going to get better. So, like I said, next episode is going to drop on the 18th. Stay tuned, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.